To see $245 billion worth of tax cuts at a time that the federal government treasurers come out and said that they're going to actually reintroduce the fuel excise tax, which would have only cost the federal government $6 billion over the next 6 months, at a time where people are struggling right now to put diesel or petrol in their vehicles, should be seen as treasonous. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Nick DeMeadow, the state member for Hinchinbrook, but also deputy leader of the Kabbie Australian Party. It's the 30th of September today, 2022, and I'm here to give you the RE-KAP recap, our weekly roundup of exactly what Kabbie Australian Party MPs have been up to this week in the electorate, but also down in Parliament. This morning I want to talk to you firstly about what Mr. Katter, Bob Katter, has been doing down in the federal parliament this week. And he actually met with the federal defence minister to see if he could help Bob come up with a solution that may involve the ADF when it comes to the worker shortage we have in regional Queensland in our farming communities right now. Bob actually suggested that perhaps the ADF staff could be working within the sugar industry to help get this massive crop off we have this year before it's worth nothing sitting in the paddock. He's actually had some good conversation, and there may be a solution coming forward from that, but we'll stay tuned. Bob also has delivered a stirring speech in Parliament this week. Federal Parliament looks to pass legislation which would be the Stage 3 tax cuts that was actually first introduced by the Morrison government and has been picked up by the Albanese government. What these tax cuts will see, that 70% of these benefits will actually go to the 25% richest people and companies in Australia. Bob has been heavily against this. Of course, we'll see $245 billion of tax cuts delivered to the higher end of town. This will mean billionaires across Australia will benefit from tax cuts when the lower income earners in Australia are struggling right now. To see $245 billion worth of tax cuts at a time that the federal government treasurers come out and said that they're going to actually reintroduce the fuel excise tax, which would have only cost the federal government $6 billion over the next 6 months, at a time where people are struggling right now to put diesel or petrol in their vehicles, should be seen as treasonous from the federal government looking after, and this is the federal Labor government, might add, which should be looking after the working class of Australia, looking after the high end of town. I can understand why Bob is absolutely furious about this. In his speech, he talked about the political elites betraying the average Queensland and Australian, saying that this sell-off of gas, mineral resources and deregulation of primary industry aligns with also the deregulation of the dairy industry and letting the supermarket duopoly and farmers be held to ransom should be absolutely a tragedy right now while they're talking about tax cuts for the higher end of town. We're not looking after our middle class income earners, and they're the people that are struggling the most, not the billionaires in this country.
What sort of a country sells all of its gas for 6 cents a unit and then buys it back, its own Australian gas, at current prices of around $32? Not 6 cents, which we sold it for, but $32. The only country on earth that has no import charges is Australia. In fact, the first act of this government of significance was to subsidise imports of motor vehicles. Are you so locked into the primitive laissez-faire capitalism of the 1800s? Didn't they teach you in school that little children worked for 20 hours a day, believe it or not, at the ages of 8 and 10 and 12 in factories? That's what laissez-faire capitalism delivered to you.
Robbie Katter this week has spent a fair bit of time in Charters Towers, spending time working on the housing issue and the housing crisis we have there, but also the problems that we are facing within our aged care facilities. Robbie spent a fair bit of time there and getting into some of the local issues and meeting with constituents in the area. He'll also be spending some time there this weekend for the Gold Rush Festival. Now, the Gold Rush Festival actually celebrates 150 years from the first person yelling Eureka after striking gold in the Gold Rush era in Charters Towers. A great festival, and I encourage anyone in the region to get out there and check that out. Also this week, we saw the Premier doll herself up to say all the right things around energy policy and the future of electrical generation here in Queensland. They've claimed that they'll be able to reach a 70% renewable energy target by 2032. Now, funnily enough, this coincides with the state government looking to host the Olympics around this time, which will make us likely look good to the rest of the world, but at what cost? We've been told that the ambitious plan is going to cost Queenslanders $62 billion. They've talked about a new dam, pumped hydro out there in Mackay, which none of us have even heard about before. And also, we're asking the question from the KAP, why is Hell's Gate being left out of this? But also, who's going to pay for this infrastructure? Up until now, infrastructure, when it comes to electrical generation and distribution, has been put onto the end user through a full cost recovery on the electrical asset. We want to ask, will this money be actually tacked onto the end of everyone's power bills when we're seeing record high electricity bills? Or will this be coming from another source like consolidated revenue? Or will they be trying to source this from the coal industry royalties hike that we're seeing at the moment? It's funny to think that 0.3 of all global emissions are actually created here in Queensland, but we're happy to send our coal offshore to be burnt in third world countries and across the world. It's a bit of a tricky one for the Queensland government to be answering the questions on this, and we'll continue to push this one in Parliament. A good news story, though, to come out of this is Copper String 2.0, a project that we've been talking about for a long time and advocating for to connect the Northwest Mineral Province to the national electricity grid. Seems to have got an extra push along and a couple of mentions in the speech from the Premier. Joe O'Brien, who works for Copper String 2.0, has been pretty interested in this and has made some announcements this week through Channel 7, and we'll have a look at the video in the sec, which sees them hopeful to see this project have concrete coming out of the ground in early 2023.
Copper String 2.0 has finally got the Coordinator General's approval.
She's recommended that the project proceed with a number of important environmental conditions.
Developers are now hoping to break ground by early next year at the latest.
Robbie also this week has been working on Cabbie Compensation. A lot of our cab drivers across Queensland have never been fully compensated for the devastating effects of the Queensland state government allowing Uber to kick off in Queensland and basically and effectively deregulating the taxi industry, which had licences worth quite a lot of money, which was actually regulated by the state government. In New South Wales, they've seen $130,000 in compensation going to taxi licence holders. This is a thing that Robbie Katter has welcomed, and he has been putting calls out to the state government to follow suit. This is the right thing to do. These cab drivers invested heavily into an industry that was regulated by the Queensland government, and the Queensland government did very little, if anything, to help them protect them across from the introduction of Uber. They deserve to be compensated, and the KAP will continue to take up the fight for cab drivers across Queensland. Shane Knuth this week is nailing a few pigs up in the Gulf and smashing a few barras out there from the punt. And I hear he's doing quite well up there on his well-earned break, and we hope that he's staying away from the crocodiles and the bitey end of them and enjoying himself. He's hopefully be back in the weeks to come. I've also been busy in the Hinchinbrook electorate this week. It kicked off on Sunday last week where I attended the Forest Beach markets and got a good chance to get out there and put a finger on the pulse in Hinchinbrook, find out what's going on down there. And the main topic people are talking about is right now the state government is actually doing a survey on boat ramps and marine access facilities across Queensland. Forest Beach desperately needs all tidal access, but also access that's sheltered from the northerly and southerly breezes when it whips up. Forest Beach residents have been encouraged, along with other Hinchinbrook residents, doesn't matter if you're at Forest Beach, Lucinda, Balgale Beach, or even Rolling Stone. If you've got a problem with your marine access right now, we encourage you to get on the Queensland State Government website. There's a section there for Queensland Maritime Safety to actually fill out the survey, which asks people to give their feedback about marine access and the need for money to be spent in these areas in the future. Yesterday I attended Police Remembrance Day, National Police Remembrance Day across the Hinchinbrook electorate, and it actually coincides with the feast of St. Michael in the Catholic Church. Funnily enough, St. Michael is the patron saint of police because of his work, I guess, to drive out evil in the upper echelons of heaven. And also St. Michael is actually a patron saint of a number of organisations and groups that work to work against the force of evil. So it's lovely that it coincides. Police Remembrance Day is a day that we remember those that have lost their lives in the line of duty, and every officer, every family that didn't have an officer come home, we remember them on Police Remembrance Day. And I attended 2 lovely services, one in Ingham, but also one here, which was in Townsville, a candlelight vigil down the Strand that was actually really touching, and it was an absolute honour to lay a wreath on behalf of the fallen and on behalf of those across the Hinchinbrook electorate. Also this week, we took up the fight with not only the state government but the Townsville City Council to have stolen vehicles and abandoned vehicles removed in a timely manner across the northern beaches of Townsville. We want to see those cars removed quickly, especially if they provide safety risk to the public or a nuisance to residents in the area. Those vehicles, no matter what the circumstances, once they've got a police aware sticker on them, they should be moved within 24 hours as far as I'm concerned. Cleveland Bay Detention Centre has also posed some problems this week where we've been hearing reports that the place is overflowing. They're actually letting kids out to let other kids in, mainly because we need to get these kids off the street. But we've got an acute problem where do we put these kids? We just can't keep releasing them. And I believe that the state government and the LNP are fresh out of ideas. The LNP are very good at pointing out that there's a problem. Blind Willie could see that. But the reality is they can't come up with a better solution than breach of bail as an offence. Although I support breach of bail being brought back as an offence, I think it will do very little to curb the youth crime problem across Queensland. These kids are seeking notoriety right now and not scared of being locked up. They're not scared of the repercussions, and Cleveland Bay Detention Centre is not doing its job in rehabilitating these children. We've been calling for relocation sentencing to be at least trialled in Queensland, where we would see the building of the detention centre in a rural location where these kids could be housed from 6 to 12 months so they could go through proper programs to be rehabilitated. So hopefully one day they can be reintroduced into society as a successful member. We would hope that the state government would actually be looking at this as an option, because I think they're fresh out of ideas, and with a 95% reoffending rate, everything should be on the table, and the minister has very little places to hide on this one. Most people, when you actually explain this to them, say we don't want these kids out on bail in the first place. Kids that are offending should be locked up. They shouldn't be out on bail. What we're hearing though from whispers coming out of Cleveland Bay Detention Centre are alarming. They're actually moving kids out of there right now, releasing kids so that they can put new kids in there because the place is full. Even if these kids were breaching bail, where do we put them? We need more detention centres built, or relocation sentencing to be introduced as a policy and enacted on so that we have more places to put these offending kids. Because right now Cleveland Bay Detention Centre is just being used as a drop-in centre for most of these kids. They're not deterred. They're not deterred from being slapped with breach of bail as an offence. They're not being deterred as being slapped with unlawful use of a motor vehicle as an offence. As a quick reminder, if you're watching this on Facebook, Instagram or any of the YouTube channels, please subscribe. It's the best way to keep up to date with what Katters Australian Party MPs are up to. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of this week's Katters Australian Party recap. I hope you enjoyed a long weekend. This will be the last long weekend, which will be Queen's birthday long weekend. After this will be the King's birthday long weekend. Whatever you're doing, if you're out there exploring the great outdoors or just having a break at home, I hope you're enjoying yourself. And if you're working, of course, thank you for doing all you do to keep this country running. I'll catch us all next week. Cheers.